Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. Our podcast features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This series of the podcast is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So pop over and visit www.arachas.ie for more information. So in this series, we're looking at communicating. We're familiar with the Reggio Emilia term, the 100 languages of children. So over the current episodes, we're looking at some of the ways in which children communicate. And for this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Jackie Maguire. Jackie has a HDIP in Community Arts Education from the NCAD. She has an MA in Equality Studies from UCD, a BA in Drama and Theatre Studies and Environmental Studies from Liverpool Hope University. She's currently a research associate at TCD, a lecturer on early childhood arts at Maynooth University, Dublin City University, and Hibernia College. And she practices as an early childhood artist, although she works predominantly through music using the renowned colour strings approach and the visual arts. Her practice is also influenced by her formal drama training, which she incorporates as a performative element in her methodologies. Her background includes over 15 years of working with children in Ireland and the UK, 5 years managing a community creche and youth service in inner city Dublin. And she also worked as a development officer with Fingal County Childcare Committee. Recently, she's been involved in arts programmes such as Artful Dodgers, Big Ways, Little Ways at the National Gallery of Ireland, Space Invaders Early Years Arts Festival, and the Wonder Project. And Jackie has also presented at a number of national and international conferences on her work as an early years artist and researcher. So a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with our listeners today. Jackie, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So we might start with, that idea of music as a language, as one of the 100 languages of children that Reggio talks about. And you also mentioned the idea of the right under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, that idea of the rights to access arts. So can you take us through some of your thoughts on those aspects of music as one of the 100 languages?
I can indeed. I love this quote. It's by Tafuri, and it was a book titled Infant Musicality. And it talks about the power of music. And I just think it's a lovely way to start this podcast. And it says that music is a gift that you can offer your child, a treasure that cannot be consumed. The gift of musicality. Music is fundamental in the life of each one of us. It enriches us, accompanies us, gives us moments of deep joy. Music is also a language that allows us to communicate with others in a different way from words. And what I love about this quote is that it talks about the fact that music allows us to communicate with others in a different way from words as well. And it opens us up to this idea of, the 100 languages of communication. And it also connects in with our well-being, and the fact that it enriches us as individuals, that accompanies us, that it gives us moments of deep joy. And I know as well, as a musician, I would predominantly play Rio style samba. And I know that music has taken me to places all over the world. It's given me so much joy as an individual. It's very much part of who I am and part of my identity. But the wonderful thing as well about music is the way that it's an alternate language. So there's this, when we think about music as another language, I suppose traditionally, when we think about music, or we as this other form of language, we think about why it's so effective is really because music, does actually have its own musical notation. It has its own written language as well. It has music symbols, and these indicate, the pitches and the rhythms or the chords of a song. So music as another form or as another art form really is this kind of other language, which I think is fascinating. Of course, there are other languages that the Reggio Emilia approach talks about and refers to, the visual arts, the drama, dance, writing, all of these other ways in which we can communicate. Music is one of those other languages that the Reggio Emilia approach embraces. So I think it really is fascinating that music as an alternate form of communication also has its own written form. And I think, going back to your point as well, in terms of the rights of young people and the rights of children, under the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, children have a right to access the arts on a regular basis. So they have a right to access music on a regular basis. They have a right to access the visual arts. They have a right to access drama and dance. And yet what we find often is that children might not be able to access music in the everyday or access the visual arts in the everyday. So it's really about, ensuring that children are exposed to music and that children can access art experiences in the everyday in their settings.
And that's bringing up something Cliona Noonan talked about in a previous episode of the podcast, that idea of very young children, if they're exposed, becoming performance literate, that they're used to the idea of observing performing arts. And in our chat before I pressed the record button, you were saying about the baby in the womb being influenced by the music they're hearing. So, it reminds me of a friend of mine who spoke about listening to, I think, Norah Jones when her baby, who's now a young man, was in the womb, and discovering after he was born that listening to that same CD helped him to settle when he was a very young baby, because he carried that through with him. And we do well to remember that in working with very young children, that they've been exposed to music pre-birth, and we need to continue that exposure after they're born.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's fascinating. I mean, Tafori in the book Infant Musicality, they notes that the facts are, we know that a fetus begins to hear from the 24th week of pregnancy. Now, it might be that it's even happening before that, but we know the facts are that a fetus can hear from the 24th week of pregnancy. And what they did it was a longitudinal piece of music research. They actually got parents and the main carer to sing to the baby at a prenatal stage. And the parent or carer, it's the Norah Jones example that you're talking about, but the parent sang a song, a particular song, and they sang it and sang it and sang it. And about 5 days after the baby was born, they sang that same song to the baby, obviously outside of the womb. And they've recorded the reaction of the infants, and it is absolutely remarkable. I've looked at the DVD, and the baby's face stops, the eyes open wide, the mouth opens wide, and there's this instant recognition and connection. And obviously the baby is hearing this song for the first time outside of the womb, but you can see from the baby's responses that there's that recognition. We know that, the open mouth, the eyes, for a young infant who's often, the eyes they're just learning to open them up, and the mouth as well. And, it's quite remarkable to see the reaction from the baby at that time.
Magic, the sense of security and familiarity that can bring.
Yeah, and the bonding and the connection that's made between the carer and the child. And
Mm,
so I think it's really interesting. I mean, we know as well that babies are born with a predisposition for music. Picasso says, the same. He talks about all children being born artists, so there's this understanding. And the research is telling us that babies are born, with a predisposition for music. And we know that they're sensitive to the elements of music, in particular to changes in pitch, tempo, beat, duration, and tone. We know from that research that those babies, were sensitive to the song, and they recognize the song. So it's whether children are exposed to the language of music or not, or to the language of other art forms. So if children are predisposed to music, they develop the language of music by being regularly exposed to it. So they're predisposed to it. I know this is quite wordy here, they're
yeah,
predisposed, but if
it's
we
not.
expose children regularly, then they can develop the language of music, like the way we do with learning to talk and learning to read. In early years and with infants and babies, we really prioritize verbal communication.
Mm,
As a form of communication, whereas obviously Reggio talks about the 100 languages of communication. How we can communicate through dance or song or the visual arts or writing. But in our society, we really focus on language and oral language, and getting children being able to talk so that they can write.
mm,
So we expose children regularly to stories, and we promote oral language, and we get children talking, and as such children learn to talk, and then they move on and they learn
mm,
to write. So we really need to think about and see music in that same way, and the other art forms as well. If we regularly expose children to the to music in the everyday and to the language of music, and by that I mean early years professionals understanding the language of music, like words such as pulse and beat. What does that mean? Sharing those words with children, like the pulse is the heartbeat of a song. It's it's the bim bom. Then we have a rhythm in between that, which might be ba 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 ba. The pitch, the high notes, the low notes, um, things like pitch matching. I might sing a melody, and the children match that same pitch. The timbre, the tone, the quality of an instrument or the voice, the tempo, the speed, whether the music gets faster or slower, the dynamic, whether we're loud or quiet. So it's about kind of developing the language of music and understanding the language of music, and then sharing that, and early years educators becoming comfortable in the language of music.
So I'm going to come in there and say, how you're a
How?
musician,
Yeah.
you're trained in all these things, you play instruments. A lot of early years educators aren't.
Mhm.
So, have you ideas on how educators can uh, maintain this exposure to music with the young children that they work with every day?
Yeah, there's many different approaches out there. So I'm a professional musician, but I've learned music through using my listening ear. So I have some training that I've done in terms of music theory, but in the main, my learning is through listening. Um, and so that's kind of, again, that's really how children are learning as well. They're listening. So it's the starting point really, I suppose, in terms of some of the different approaches to music in the early years. There's color strings, which I've trained in. There's Kadai. There's Dalquoise, which very much focuses on movement and music. And then there's Suzuki methods. So people might be aware of these. But the real starting point is through the voice. So it's about learning the language of music through the voice. And we know that the instrument is the primary, the voice is the primary instrument. Sometimes people don't think about the voice as being the primary instrument, but it is. And through singing, children, learn the language of music. They learn about pitch, they learn about tempo and rhythms. So that's a really, really good starting point, is the singing play. We talk about it in terms of singing play and creating opportunities for children to sing. It might be call and response songs. It could be pitch matching songs. So that's one area. Another area is around the aural awareness. So really getting children listening to the sounds around them, listening to the sounds in the everyday, listening to soundscapes as well, thinking about music broadly as well. And not just maybe as in terms of playing and experiencing instruments, but thinking about it in terms of listening, going outside, creating a space where we can sit down with children and begin to listen to the sounds. What are they hearing? Can they hear the wind or the leaves? Do they hear crunching sounds? Do they hear the birds? I'm beginning to really listen and hear the sounds. And sometimes what I love to do with children as well is, we might gather leaves or pine cones or different props, things that we found outside, twigs, and then we might create a soundscape, an outdoor soundscape together, an improvised soundscape together. So children might start, one child might start, crunching a leaf. Somebody else might be tapping sticks. Somebody else might be making scratching sounds. And suddenly we're all adding to this and creating this wonderful soundscape. So really, in terms of music awareness as well, that your key starting point is around the aural awareness. Then it's the vocal awareness, and then it's kinesthetic, it's the movement. In order to, the Dalquoise theory really believes that in order to be able to play music, we have to embody it, we have to feel it. And the color strings approach that I've trained in as well follows that same theory. So, for example, when I've started working and delivering music workshops with children as young as 3 months. So in order for them to feel the pulse, let's say the main beat of a song, the bim, bom, bim, bom, it could be the 1, 2, 3, 4. They obviously can't walk around. They can't even fully support themselves upright. So they're being held by the parent or the carer, and the music is being played, and that parent is bouncing that child to the pulse. So they begin to feel the pulse themselves. As they get older, when they're able to walk, there's an approach that I would use through color strings, which is where we begin to explore music notation through tas, titis, tas, and ta. So this is a way of kind of, let's say, for an example, a crotchet note, which would be a ta, 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 can be the main kind of, could be the pulse beat. But we introduce different teddy bears, and the teddy bears represent those sounds. So, for example, a ta note would be mommy bear, she walks like this, ta, 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 ta. Mommy bear, she walks like this, ta, 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 ta. So the children are walking to the beat, and they begin to also walk to that same beat. They walk to the ta, 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 ta. So they're actually embodying it as well. They also have other notes that they might walk to as well, which is a TT, which is a quaver, and those beats are faster. So we say that that's baby bear because they have smaller footsteps and they can't walk as quickly as mommy bear, for example. So the baby bear has smaller footsteps and faster footsteps, and they're like titi 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 titi. So you'd have baby bear, she walks like this, titi 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 titi, whereas mommy bear, she walks like this, ta 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 ta. So that's, and it goes on from there. So children begin to embody the music. They generally tap out the pulse on their bodies. So the main beat of the song is on the bodies. Again, think about the heart, it's on the body, but rhythms, we clap out on the hands, or we might use clave sticks. So rhythms, ba 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 ba, or could be the lyrics of a song or phrases. So there's lots of different techniques there, but it's about finding opportunities, going back to that kind of kinesthetic awareness. When I play samba, we move, we step. Children need to move in order to communicate and to embody music as well. So it's really providing opportunities for children to move, to dance, and to embody the music. And then there's the other piece around playing and experiencing music.
It's all
and
very
instruments.
sensorial, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And again,
multi-sensorial.
Yeah. And Reggio, again, in some of the key kind of principles around Reggio as well. And it relates to and talks about children learning through their senses. Ashtar talks about children learning through their senses as well, under the communicating theme. And active learning as well. Ashtar talks about active learning, under one of the key principles. And I always find it very helpful to go back to the principles. We often kind of jump into the themes or into the aims, but when we look at the principles of Ashtar, it talks about active learning, it talks about play and hands-on experiences. So this is all under how children learn and develop. And music is a wonderful way whereby children can be active in the experience, but where they can play and have these hands-on experiences. Even the word play, we are playing an instrument. We are playing, together. We are, children can create their own songs, based on things that they're interested in. We can always expose children to music and to appropriate music, which I'll say something on as well. But children, we can, when we think about the emerging curriculum as well, it's about looking for and listening to what are the children currently interested in, and using that as a starting point to develop a musical repertoire or songs or rhymes, whatever it is, a soundscape. Yeah.
And this is about the children that it engages, rather than, kind of a group of children having to sit and watch or listen. It's about children being engaged and involved, and, the material that you're presenting to them, grabbing their interest. And you also mentioned about choosing the songs. Sometimes we hear children, singing, and they're, not able to hit the high notes. You wanted to talk about the scales that children can literally tune into.
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting, because in early years music, the research tells us that children find it very difficult to reach certain notes, their semitone notes, and that the pentatonic scale is really kind of a comfortable scale for children to work within and explore songs. So when you're selecting, this is really important, in terms of selecting music for children to sing. It's about finding songs that are within the pentatonic scale. Now, the good thing is that you don't have to just go off and look for this yourself. I mean, there's the Color Strings repertoire. They're called Singing Rascals. And they explore the pentatonic scale. We have the Kadai Society of Ireland as well. They do regular summer school programs. They might do stuff also outside of the year, where you can attend tuition and workshops. And I know Color Strings as well do training in Ireland. They're UK based, and I think Dalquoise as well also teaches here, so people can learn more by further training, but you can also get materials online. There's also a
And maybe
wonderful,
when we're finished, just while it's in my head, Jackie, sorry to interrupt you, if you can send us some of those websites, we can share them on social media and so on.
Yeah, and there's also the National Youth Choir of Scotland have produced a wonderful resource. I think it's by Lucinda Gagan, I think it is, and there's lots of songs for the different age groups, for babies, 0 to 1, 1 to kind of 3 years, 3 upwards, with a CD as well, and music notation. So if you can't read music notation, that's okay. You just need to be able to listen to the music, hear the songs. You can play the CD, you can learn the repertoire yourself there as well. So that can be a really useful starting point. But the pentatonic scale as well, we've all kind of heard the the Sounds of Music and that film as well. So we know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and do, a deer, a female deer. So we know it all. In the pentatonic scale, the scale includes do, re, mi, sol, la, do. So I'm hoping you can hear these notes. I know we checked it earlier on, but let's do it. So this is do, re, mi, sol, la, do. So that's the pentatonic scale, which is do, re, mi, sol, la, do. Do, re, mi, sol, la, do. And the notes that are difficult for young children to reach are the semitone notes, which is fa, fa, and do, re, mi, and ti, ti. So they're the semitone notes. They're difficult for children to reach. So in a lot of kind of folk songs, you'll find that the pentatonic scale, the songs are within that kind of range. Hungarian folk songs as well, the pentatonic scale is explored as well. So that's kind of important for people to kind of be aware of. So, when you're choosing music that you're going to sing with children, keep it within the do, re, mi, sol, la, do notes. Within those notes, keep it within the pentatonic scale. And also when you're exposing children to music, I think this is a really important point, that that we consider the types of music that we play to children. That it's not just white noise in the background, that it's relevant to the children's emerging interests, that it's relevant to what you're doing, or that you're beginning to think about, the children in your setting and their own musical biographies. You might have children from Hungary or from a rich kind of trad musical background, or children from Poland or Spain. So it's beginning to kind of look and consider children's own musical biographies. What kind of knowledge of music are children bringing into your setting? And how you can begin to bring that into the everyday as well, and play the music that's relevant to the children. So there's real possibilities there to partner with families. And,
exactly. Yeah. Or have parents who are musicians or play an instrument to come in and share their musical heritage is a lovely idea.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And, I know through going into the creche with my sons over the years, they've absolutely loved having their parent there. I've been into my son's school here in Sligo, and he's just lights up. His mommy's there. So there's amazing opportunities to engage with families and parents or carers, a grandparent as well, a musician, to bring them in. I remember I did a study visit to Pen Green many years ago. I was really fortunate to be involved in a CDP program, and they had a grandfather that would come in on a Friday, and that became the highlight for the children in the setting. They absolutely loved their Friday morning. And so again, it's about thinking about music, maybe bringing it into the everyday, as well as those really kind of wonderful opportunities where we have children playing, experiencing instruments or listening to music, and also in choosing music, that you choose well-produced, good quality music. So I would avoid music that is directed at children, because in the main, it's not well produced. The sound is poor, the lyrics are poor. Go for stuff that's rich, classical music, or it could be jazz, it can be folk music, it can be anything, but it's good quality. There's musicianship, it's well produced, and be really mindful as well of, if you are using maybe kind of pop music, that the lyrics are appropriate as well. Listen to
You're
the
singing my
content.
song now.
Yeah, listen to what's in those songs, because some of it might not be appropriate at all. Some of it can be very sexualized, as well. So that isn't appropriate for young children. But I think it's about, again, tuning into, we talk about the funds of knowledge. What musical knowledge do children already have? What's their musical biographies? Asking those questions when you're carrying out the induction, with families and children before they even come into your setting. And then building on that, and bringing and watching and listening to children in the everyday. Seeing what they're interested in, and then beginning to think about, well, how can I explore that through music? How can I
Yeah.
extend that interest further with children through music? Um, you know,
And
how can I do that?
and with apps like Spotify, or and on phones, you don't need, I think, to be an expert in different types of music. And you can just put in marching music or ballet music, and see what appeals to children and how they move to the different types of music, how they, you've used the term embody the music, and linking that music and movement, that it isn't a passive activity. It's, very active.
Yeah, and you actually become conscious as well, so I mean, what I do often, I have a box. I call it my knock knock box, and the box is a different shape, it's a different size. Some of my boxes have leaves on them. They are generally, that box I'll use if there's an interest from children that relates to the natural world and the natural environment. So in that box, I'll now I have a cereal box here, so it doesn't quite sound like the actual knock knock box, but I'll tap it and I'll go, knock knock knock. What's in the box? Knock knock knock. What's in the box? Knock knock knock. What's in the box? And we'll have a look at the box, but I'll also start with some percussion on it. I'll improvise. I might be just playing some beats initially. There's this box. I bring it out. I show it round to the children, and there may be no verbal communication whatsoever. And as an artist, I'm really interested in working with children through other forms of communication, and not using verbal all the time. I might use an instrument, or there could be there'll be a sound of something, and that's the invitation for children to come over. And we explore that sound, and we stop, rather than saying, okay, can everybody come over here now? I want you to have a listen to this. It's about, there's something happening over here. What's happening over here? What's going on? What's she up to now? And they come over and we have a listen and we explore a sound. So I might open the box so the children will peek in, and then I shut it. And then I open it, and I close it. And it's playful. So again, you know, and then we might open it. I might sing that song, or I might play some percussion. I might be
So
just making
Jackie's
sounds.
beating the box as you
Yeah.
do it. The sound isn't always coming through.
Yeah, I might be making sounds. And then the children, we open the box together and we discover what's inside. And there might be some beautiful herbs, or there might be branches, or whatever it is, the theme, whatever that emerging interest is from children. That's how I connect it. And then that moves into another space. So I suppose in terms of my own practice, I don't just solely work through music. I work through the visual arts, I work through drama, and I work through music as well. And I find that when I do that, the experience is very rich, you know, and that we can move to a different space. So, I mean, I'm looking at a theme here of or a photograph actually, of a workshop I did on a project called Artful Dodgers. And we were exploring the theme of the sea and the ocean. And we had all these, we had a soundscape in the background actually of the ocean, of the sea. And you could hear the waves. You could hear that movement of the waves on the sand going back and forth. So there was this lovely soundscape. And then we'd set up light boxes and screens, and children then were invited to come over and to begin to explore and experiment with the materials to hand and to create images that again were extended to the theme of the sea. So that the types of materials that we had were kind of dried seaweed, shells. You've got these lovely baubles that are kind of straw baubles that you can see through. Plastic, shredded paper. So children were then mounting and creating these beautiful images in response to the soundscape of the sea, and using materials that, the colors were blues and sandy colors, and the materials were, sand there as well. They were able to then explore that emerging interest further through the visual arts with the soundscape in the background, and create these beautiful visual imageries, while experimenting with the overhead projector. And we as the artists were working alongside the children, exploring these images and with the children. So again, for me as an artist, I'm very
Beautiful.
interested in the environment as the third teacher, which is a Reggio Emilia principle, in terms of that artistic invitation, that we invite children, we allow them to enter into this space, if it's the music space or a visual arts space, and we don't force them into those spaces, but we find ways to get their attention, ways that aren't verbal, that are, it could be a pose, a stance, a sound, something that's immediately the children are interested. So it's about creating the fantastical, and and giving children the time to be on the periphery as well. If they want to, they can be observing from the side, but over time I've seen children who might be on the outside because that's where they feel safe initially, but then over time they come inside into the space. And it's about inviting children, allowing them to make those choices, and really kind of, thinking about how we communicate with children, the relationships as well. Again, Reggio would talk very much about that, the relational kind of pedagogy, and how we learn alongside each other, with each other. So again, the artist is learning.
Yeah,
It's
I think that
reciprocal.
bit of time is so important, giving children the time and the space to, feel comfortable to engage at the level that they want to engage in.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And it's often overlooked. We often don't give children the time to revisit work.
And that's
We
crucial too.
It is, or to, because maybe dinner has to happen, but again, I've worked in a setting in Rush on Artful Dodgers in a creche, Rosso community creche, and I also worked with little learners in Mulhuddard on the Artful Dodgers project as well. And I remember they had the setting, they had responded to the theme of dinosaurs. But rather than doing it maybe in more of a literary way, they chose through books, which might have been the traditional way of exploring that emerging interest. They decided to work in 3D and create an actual dinosaur habitat. And they used clay, they sculpted, they created 3D props, and this was in a kind of a small world. It was a small world habitat, but it still was quite big, and that habitat was created on the floor in the main room by the children with the early years educators. And it was left there, and the children moved around it, and they didn't step on it. And they came back to it as the days progressed, and it still stayed there. And then after, I think it was about a week or two, it moved into the hallway, and it was added to in the hallway. So we were really interested in exploring spaces and working in spaces as well that you traditionally wouldn't work in, through the arts. So hallways became areas of interest. We did a lot of work outside as well through the arts. So that habitat remained and stayed, and the children were given the time to cultivate it, to add to it, to create stories. There was huge opportunities there to document as well. Stories would have emerged out of the play that was happening in that habitat. So again, it's about giving children the time to make and create and to do and to explore the arts, and to come back to it, and that we have these spaces that are accessible to children. If we bring it back to music as well, it's about thinking about how is music used in your setting? Is it in a conscious or an unconscious way? Is it in response to an emerging curriculum? How are you supporting children's aural awareness, their vocal awareness, their kinesthetic awareness, and playing and experiencing instruments? Do children have access to instruments? Do you have enough instruments? Because what you find is that, if you haven't enough instruments, then it leads to conflict. Often what I have is I might have a range of percussive instruments like egg shakers, but there's enough for everyone, and they're shared out, and then the material or the songs or whatever we're exploring, the singing material, everyone has a shaker, everyone is involved in bouncing that shaker or shaking that shaker on the beat. So also there will be other instruments that you can't have one of every one of them. So it's about sharing them, passing them around, allowing children to explore those materials, and also, talking to children about the instruments, about how fragile they are, introducing them so that children begin to understand that these instruments need to be cared for and used in a certain way as well. So it is about those conversations happening as well, and with children.
I love that idea of revisiting, because it's one of the things that Shielta talks about is, that children have the opportunity to merge new learning with previous knowledge to make new meaning. And you can kind of only do that if there is that opportunity to revisit and rethink and deepen knowledge as knowledge increases. Jacqueline, you've given us so much to think about there, and I know you wanted to end with a quote on the importance of this being emerging and tying in with children's interests and engaging them. So do you want to kind of wrap up with final thoughts on that quotation from Elizabeth Jones?
Yeah, I just have it here, and I think also on the the time and revisiting. I mean, I know Early Childhood Ireland brought some the colleagues and staff from the San Miniato from San Miniato to present many years ago in Dublin on the San Miniato approach in Italy. And interestingly, one of their 3 key principles is time.
A huge trust, opportunity, and time is one of my key mantras. I just love it. It's just so important and fundamental and meaningful, I think. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because it was going through my head as you talked about it, that the importance of the time and the opportunity and putting the trust in. And you mentioned that about introducing children to instruments and how fragile they are, but trusting them to explore them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, I suppose, to end on maybe the emerging curriculum, Elizabeth Jones kind of coined the first, well, she coined, the emerging curriculum, and she talked about it being a curriculum is what happens. And really about the emergent means the curriculum evolves from the children and their experiences in their particular context. So again, we've talked about the musical biography, their rural context, their urban context, those kind of contexts that influence them. And this responsive curriculum emerges when skilled practitioners use and build on children's ideas and current interests and experiences as starting points for curriculum planning. So really, I would encourage you to use the emerging curriculum, or to work in that way, to be listening, observing, watching, and bringing in music material that is relevant to the children's interests, whether it's songs or soundscapes or movement, really thinking about how can I explore that emerging interest through music, and perhaps not just limiting yourself to music, music maybe with the visual arts, music with dance, music with drama, music with a number of art forms. Again, that's very much how I would work. But beginning to be brave and start using your singing voice. Again, tap into maybe any of the training that's happening out there, and embrace music and enjoy it. Thanks so much.
And I love the idea of the musical biographies as well, that link to partnership with families. And we talked about that in the previous episode with Francesca Lamorgia, that, valuing children's home languages and heritage and musical biographies. So, Jackie, thank you so much. You've given us so many ideas, so much to reflect on, so much to think about. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks a million for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Arachas Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.